Tensions escalate between two arch-enemies. India says it launched surgical strikes on suspected militants in Pakistan. This marks the first direct military response by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government following the September 18th attack on an Indian army base in Kashmir. Modi has pointed the finger at Pakistan for the assault, accusing the neighboring country of being an exporter of terrorism. He also pledged to lead a global campaign to isolate it. The bottom line could be the tipping point in Indo-Pak relations.
And I spoke about that tense relationship with Michael Kugelman. He's with the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. She spoke of the troubled history and commented on what, if anything, can be done to heal the divide.
Well, I think it's very clear what the reason for it is. I mean, this is essentially a situation of an Indian government that has repeatedly vowed to take a very strict, hard policy against Pakistan. And there have been several terrorist attacks in Kashmir and in India over the last few months that India has traced back to Pakistan, and India hadn't actually done anything. India had failed to follow up its own vows to take some type of action. So I think India's government has been in a position where it needed to show that it was not going to sit quietly in the face of Pakistani provocations. So therefore this strike that India claims it carried out was really meant to send a message to an Indian audience, above all, that being that India is ready to respond and is ready to take robust action against Pakistan. And it was also clearly meant to send a message to Pakistan that India is not going to sit quietly in the face of these provocations.
I found a headline from September of 2013 when Narendra Modi was running for office, and it said, this is the headline, India's Modi promises a tough stance against Pakistan. Is he pretty much boxed into a corner? Does he have to flex his muscle because he has to make good on this promise he made a few years back?
So I would actually argue that when Modi first became prime minister 2 years ago, he actually tried to reach out to the Pakistani government. He invited Pakistan's prime minister to his inauguration. And, the last Christmas, Modi made a surprise visit to Pakistan to meet the prime minister there. I think that India has been willing to reach out to the Pakistani government, but it now realizes that the Pakistani government simply does not have any power because the Pakistani military has completely taken over policy when it comes to India. So I think now that Modi and his government have concluded that it no longer makes sense to engage with anyone in Pakistan, certainly not the military, because the military in Pakistan is strictly opposed to reconciliation with India, but also it's simply not seen as worth engaging with the Pakistani government, hence this harder line that we've seen India take over certainly today and over the last few weeks.
It's expected the Indian and Pakistani governments would play to their domestic audiences. Are there dangers there? Is there a way that they can figure out some way to diffuse this situation?
I really worry that this situation could escalate to a very dangerous point. The good news is I think that a war, an all-out war, is unlikely simply because of nuclear realities. Both countries have nuclear weapons, and assuming cooler heads prevail, neither side wants a situation where you could escalate to the point where you have to worry about nuclear retaliations. But certainly the fact that there's so much saber-rattling, so much anger in both countries, on the street and in government, you really have to worry that the hardliners could really be whipped up. And in the case of Pakistan, you have to worry that some of these anti-India terrorists that are based there could try to stage more attacks inside India. I think that what we've seen over time, over history, is that when you have these major crises in India-Pakistan relations, eventually it's time, more than anything else, that leads things to calm down. When you had these wars in previous years, you didn't have nuclear weapons. You have nuclear weapons now, which means that there's probably not going to be an all-out war. So I think what we can hope for is that after each side has been able to posture more and blow off steam, make threatening remarks, things like that, I like to think that the situation will quietly calm down.
Tensions are once again on the rise across Indian-administered Kashmir, and now conflicting reports about what's going on there are coming from both the Indian and Pakistani government. Well, Pakistan says gunfire from Indian troops across the border killed 2 of its soldiers. India says it carried out what it calls surgical strikes by sending in elite troops to attack militants. It says they were believed to be preparing to infiltrate the part of Kashmir that's administered by India. Well, police in Pathankot in northern India say they've carried out search operations after receiving information about armed men in the area. A militant attack on Indian-administered Kashmir killed 18 people last week. Pakistan has denied India's accusations that it was behind the attack. Well, a moment we'll be in New Delhi, but first let's go to Islamabad and speak to Javed Rana. Javed, good to speak to you again. So on what basis can we take that these strikes carried out, and were they surgical?
Well, Pakistan has said, Pakistan military spokesman has made it public that, in fact, these were mortar guns which were used, small weaponries were used, and it all started at around 2 a.m. in the morning, and it concluded at around between 6 and 8 a.m. That reflects that this is basically nothing new in that part of Pakistan's trouble region with India. There have been similar incidents in the past, and same thing has happened again. But again, India has been using kind of terminology which gives an impression that perhaps it was a surgical strikes on Pakistani side of the border. Pakistan has completely denied it. Prime Minister in a statement has said that nonetheless the Pakistani nation is ready to fight any war with India in the event of any threat that comes from the Indian side of the border. Pakistan Air Force has also said that they have not detected, its radars have not detected any movement of aircraft from India. So all these reports, according to Pakistan, are simply a pack of lies.
And Javed, just quickly, if you would, what's going to be the response from Pakistan to this killing of the 2 soldiers? There has been talk of nuclear weapons being used.
Well, I think if the level of the tension continues at this level, where there would be possibly more exchange of fire on the disputed border, that is most likely to happen. But in case Indian intrudes inside Pakistani side of the border, they use surgical strikes, Pakistan most probably would hit at least 30 sites on Indian side of the border, and that is likely to escalate tension between 2 sides. And that event, Pakistan has said time and again, it has not ruled out the possibility of using nuclear devices, particularly within the 25 kilometers radius. That is the nuclear flashpoint. Pakistan has been saying time and again that international community must come in and intervene and resolve this long-standing dispute with India.
OK, Javed for now in Islamabad, thank you. Let's go now to New Delhi and speak to Kumar Dhananjay. Kumar, good to speak to you this morning. So just give us the facts, if you can. What exactly happened this morning? Were there surgical strikes carried out by the Indian Army?
Well, this is what has been claimed by the Indian government and by the Indian Army, that a surgical strike was conducted last night. The operation started after midnight and lasted for a couple of hours, something between 2 to 4 hours, in which 7 terrorist launch pads were attacked. And the DGMO, in its press briefing, has said that around 40 terrorists were killed. 2 Pakistan Army personnel were also killed in the attack. And this was this was seen as a retaliatory attack after what happened in Uri on 18th of this month, the attack in which 18 soldiers were killed. And the Indian Army and the Indian political leadership has already made it clear that they will do something, but the time and place will be chosen by them. And this was being seen. And it became very clear that today Prime Minister was about to chair a meeting to reconsider most favored nation granted to Pakistan. That meeting was cancelled, and a cabinet committee on security was rather hold. And after that, the word came out that India has conducted surgical strikes inside Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, in which about 40 terrorists were killed, including 2 Pakistani Army personnel.
So, Kumar, the Indians are admitting that they did kill Pakistani Army personnel, including these terrorists, as they claim. Now, could this escalate into something further, do you think? Is that the sense you're getting in India? Because obviously Pakistan will feel it's now within their rights for them to retaliate.
Well, as of now, what Pakistan is saying is that it was not a surgical strike, but it was a cross-border fire, a ceasefire violation. If that is the stand Pakistan is taking, then there is no question of escalating it. It could be something can take place at the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. But the Indian side, Indian government can see that there could be a retaliation from the Pakistani side. Therefore, the Home Minister has ordered that people residing around 10 kilometers in the state of Punjab which borders Pakistan should be immediately evacuated. So this is the measure that is being taken by the government so that even in the case of a retaliatory attack by Pakistan, there are no civilian casualties. The Prime Minister has already spoken to the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Mahbooba Mufti. He has spoken to leaders across the political parties, to the President of India. So every measure the government of India is putting in place in case of any retaliatory attack, the government can respond through army and minimize any civilian casualty.
Okay.
But yes, there is a possibility that this can escalate into if not a full-fledged war, but some kind of retaliatory attack from Pakistan is expected by the Indian establishment.
Okay, Kumar from New Delhi, thank you for now.
We're in a new era of uncertainty, I think, in these cross-border relations, and so that, I think, by definition means more volatility, a higher risk premium, which can be attached to Indian assets. And I think, the fall we saw yesterday is a legitimate response to developments as they've unfolded. I mean, I think it's important to emphasise that, this is a pretty considered and critically calibrated response by the Modi administration to the Uri attacks. I mean, I think this is best seen as a military jab rather than an all-out haymaker. But they're clearly trying to signal to Pakistan that these type of incursions, these type of attacks, just will not be tolerated, and critically that they're not going to be costless for Pakistan.
Absolutely. Nigel made a great point. India doesn't look cheap. Do we expect an aggressive re-rating anytime soon? What's going to be the catalyst for that?
No, I think that India very much is in a sweet spot in terms of its macroeconomic fundamentals. I mean, I think one thing to highlight that maybe some of the viewers haven't noticed is that we got the latest update from the World Economic Forum, their annual Global Competitiveness Index. And India has done very well in that. It actually moved up 16 places. It was the country that showed the biggest improvement. And I think this really speaks to the gradual progressive improvements in the business climate that have really been affected by the NDA administration over the last 2 years. India is standing out as really the fastest growing emerging market. And I think, slowing growth in China, I just think sharpens China's appeal to global investors. So I think there's a lot of money still wanting to come into India, and I think that speaks to the very high, pretty almost frothy valuations we've been seeing on the equity market. So as the previous segment stressed, if we do get these type of risk events, the market will be prone to pull back. But I think, given India's pretty sound fundamentals, a big downdraft in stocks looks pretty unlikely at this stage.
And for more on this, I want to bring in Moeed Yusuf. He is the Associate Vice President of the Asia Center at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Thank you so much for joining us. We saw what was happening at the UN with the war of words. We're also seeing military exercises. So what do you think will come out of this? These two countries have been there before, but could this lead to something bigger?
One hopes not. Look, I mean, when you get to this situation, the risks are so high that you can never rule out an inadvertent escalation to a crisis. I mean, they've been to crisis at least 3 times in the past 15 years or so. The last one being when the Mumbai attacks in 2008 took place, and they got to an air war situation. I think it's really posturing. The moment for the military strike, if there was one, is gone. It's literally the first day or two. Both sides have military forces which can actually defend in a way that neither gains by going for a use of force option. At the end of the day, that's probably the best we can hope for. But I don't see them backing off, because if either one goes first or blinks first, I think the other gains a symbolic victory. And that's what South Asia has been about for so long.
These two countries also have nuclear weapons. It's something that's been talked about. Could this ever escalate? Could these two countries go into war?
I don't want to think about it, because what comes after that is quite horrific. One of the things that we've found so far is that short of war, they know how to control the situation. Once you get into a war situation, neither side has ever managed or had an opportunity to see how to control it. Once you're in war, the fog of war hits, anything can go wrong. And part of the problem is the entire world descends on India and Pakistan and says, don't do this, don't go to war. But only in the crisis moment. Once the crisis is over, everybody goes about their business, forgets about it till the next crisis. And the key is to find a way not to allow these countries to get to this point. Because once they're there, as I said, the risks are simply too high with nuclear weapons in the mix.
Narendra Modi, Nawaz Sharif, they have a personal relationship. There was a lot of optimism at one point. Modi even went to Sharif's house just 8 or 9 months ago. What's the status of their relationship? And could the two of them bring down the tensions?
To be very honest, I don't think they have one. The relationship is better than what most expected in the beginning because Modi has a hardline view on Pakistan, etc. But since that visit that you mentioned, I mean, he coming to Lahore, things have gone down and things have gone south very, very quickly. And, you know, this particular incident and the war of words, it's Modi and Nawaz Sharif. So you can see very clearly that this is coming from the very top. And once the situation gets so dicey, I think the kind of relationship that these two have cannot overshadow the kind of situation that they're in. India and Pakistan, remember, 70 years, wars, nuclear weapons. A relationship can take you only that far. It may not get you, you know, it may not get the countries to war. But short of that, I think they've really got to work on their issues. And that's where the biggest weakness is. They keep talking about it. Terrorism, no resolution at all. You have a crisis. You go back to saying, yeah, we'll talk about it. Nothing happens. Kashmir, both sides, yeah, we want to resolve it. You don't get there. So I think unless you get to the specific issues of Kashmir and terrorism, I think you're going to keep falling into this trap of crises, worrying about a nuclear war, pulling back, and then unfortunately falling back into it.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Mouid Youssef, thank you so much for your perspective. We appreciate your time.
Hello, welcome to this hour's news desk on CCTV News. I'm Wang Yizhi in Beijing. Let's start on the border with Pakistan and India. The Pakistani side has accused India's army of killing 2 of its soldiers with unprovoked shooting along the line of control. The shooting started at 2:30 a.m. and continued for 5.5 hours. The Pakistani military says the Indian army opened fire in 4 sectors. Tensions have risen along the line of control after an attack on a base camp in India-controlled Kashmir on September the 18th, which left 17 Indian soldiers dead. India blamed Pakistan for the attack. Pakistan has rejected the accusations.
Thursday began in India with news of an emergency cabinet meeting called by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. A few hours later came the announcement by India's defense spokesperson that the army struck militant base camps in Pakistan to stop them from infiltrating into the country to conduct terror attacks.
Based on very specific and credible information which we received yesterday, that some terrorist teams had positioned themselves at launch pads along the line of control with an aim to carry out infiltration and terrorist strikes in Jammu and Kashmir and various other metros in our country. The Indian Army conducted surgical strikes last night at these launch pads.
Across the border, Pakistan denied any such strikes took place, calling India's account a fabrication. It reported 2 of its soldiers were killed and 9 others injured in what was described as an exchange of small arms fire. And Pakistan's defense minister put India on warning about such provocations in the future.
If they ever violate the line of control again, if there is another violation of the ceasefire, God willing, Pakistani forces will give them a tough response.
Tensions between the two nations have risen even higher than usual following an attack on an Indian army camp in Kashmir earlier this month. 18 Indian soldiers were killed in the assault, which India blames on Pakistan. Pakistan, however, denies any involvement.
The strikes follow an Indian campaign to isolate Pakistan diplomatically, coming one day after the government announced it would pull out of a regional summit set for November, a decision that prompted other nations to follow suit. But according to the Indian military, the threat of infiltration was endangering its citizens, forcing it to use military action now.
India is asking villagers living in critical zones along its border with Pakistan to evacuate and move to safer areas as a precautionary measure. Shweta Bajaj, CCTV, New Delhi, India.
Tensions between India and Pakistan are high after New Delhi carried out what it calls surgical strikes. It happened inside Pakistan-administered Kashmir. The attacks follow weeks of deadly violence, the killing of a Pakistan-based separatist, and the shelling of an army base in India-controlled Kashmir. Neighboring China is calling for calm. CCTV's Nathan King is in our Washington newsroom with the very latest. Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Villagers have been told to leave, and the streets of Srinagar, the capital of India-controlled area of Jammu and Kashmir, is deserted as the two countries face off in the worst crisis in Kashmir in over a decade. As you can see, smoke can be clearly seen on the Pakistani side of the line of control after India carried out what it called surgical strikes, which New Delhi says were designed to stop terrorist attacks on Indian-controlled cities.
Pakistan should realize its responsibility towards ensuring peace in this region, and hope at least now Pakistan will realize its folly and stop abetting terrorism against India.
Pakistan says Indian forces killed 2 Pakistani soldiers and wounded 9 others. Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif condemned the attacks as, quote, unprovoked and naked aggression. Pakistan also says its troops proportionately returned fire and urged India not to cross the line of control, a border which has divided the two nations' armed forces for decades.
If they ever violate the line of control again, if there's another violation of the ceasefire or the ceasefire line, God willing, Pakistani forces will give them a tough response.
India and Pakistan have fought 2 wars over Kashmir since becoming independent in 1965 and 1999. Both nations, of course, have nuclear weapons, which makes any confrontation, Elaine, even more dangerous.
And Nathan, where does China stand on this dispute as it shares a border with Kashmir?
Yeah, I mean, China has 2 areas which actually border on Indian-controlled Kashmir and Pakistani-controlled Kashmir, and they've been warning both sides to solve their difference even before this latest Indian attack incident. On Wednesday, China's foreign ministry issued a statement on its website saying, and let's read this, that China hopes, quote, that Pakistan and India will strengthen channels for dialogue, appropriately handle any differences, improve bilateral relations, and together protect the region's peace and stability. China has obviously a deep interest in the region. Pakistan, as we know, is a close partner and key destination for Beijing's One Belt, One Road investments. India and China have their own border dispute over the region. They have actually fought in the past and trying to delimit the area now in a peaceful way. A lot riding, Elaine, on the peaceful outcome in what's been called a war at the top of the world, and a very beautiful area as well. Back to you.
All right, Nathan King in our Washington newsroom.
And we begin tonight with Pakistan, and the country has condemned India for its unprovoked firing along Kashmir's line of control, which saw 2 Pakistani soldiers killed early on Thursday. Well, Pakistani troops returned fire against what it called Indian military aggression. India's military says it carried out a surgical strike against terrorists along the de facto border with Pakistan and Kashmir. India's Director General of the Military Operations, Rabin Singh, said the strikes were aimed at neutralizing terrorist forces preparing to invade Indian territory.
China and India held a dialogue on fighting terrorism on the 27th of this month. We held conversations on specific measures to enhance cooperation in the area of anti-terrorism and safety, and how to face the threat of terrorism. We reached an important consensus. China has been addressing tensions between India and Pakistan through various channels. We are keeping communication open and hope India and Pakistan will enhance dialogue, solve their differences properly, and safeguard the stability and security of the region.